All right, so I have not yet talked about this team in the offseason. And I try to keep on this show, because I am the executive producer, a good balance of programs that I talk about. Try to get to everybody at least once or twice during the offseason. And Cal has long been my preferred sleeper team in the ACC. Now, they're not a sleeper to me. They might be a sleeper to the rest of the country. So I just say, you know what? I've talked about them so much, I don't think they're going to sneak up on anybody anymore. I might need a new one. And I came up with one, and it's Wake Forest. So Wake Forest last year, in the quietest, sometimes ugliest, but most dramatic way possible, went 9-4 and ended with a win over the SEC. I know it was Mississippi State. That's Mississippi State team that took Tennessee to overtime, that took Texas down to the wire, and that folks were, and also, by the way, beat Arizona State, who was a good team in the Big 12. So, do I think Mississippi State was great? No. Were they terrible? Also no. That was what Wake Forest did last year. They won the Duke's Mayo Bowl. Jake Dickert got a nice little mayonnaise bath there. Coming into this season, Bill Connolly's metrics over at ESPN and S&P Plus have Wake Forest at number 58, which is 11th in the ACC, lower than you would perhaps expect. That might be due in part to their returning production, which is just 53% compared to last season, or from last season, and that is 62nd in the country. And by the way, I was just noting this, or I thought I would note this as I went through all this. They're 58th in S&P Plus. The team right behind them, UNLV, one of the favorites of the Mountain West. Thought that was interesting to know. So, what have their recruiting efforts been like since Jake Dickert came in and surprised everyone? They had a preseason win total last year of 4.5. They went way past it. No one was expecting them, myself included, to do much of anything in Jake Dickert's first year, and they did incredibly well. And they did so with pretty mediocre play at the quarterback position. Jake Dickert is a former defensive coordinator, and he came in and the defense that he implemented won them a lot of football games last year. So they come into 2026 with a top 40 high school recruiting class, number 38, according to 24/7, and the number 65 portal class. Now, that's not as strong as you would maybe like to see if you're trying to, on paper, define a strong trend upward. They brought in 24 total transfers to fill some of the voids that were left by guys that graduated last year. But I just want to go back to 2025 for a moment. They started the year in perhaps the most uninspiring way possible, even in a victory. They beat Kennesaw State, one of, I believe it's 2 programs in the country with owls as their mascot, Temple being the other one. They beat Kennesaw State 10-9. Now, for any Power 4 school, that's not good. To be fair, Kennesaw State went on to win Conference USA. So they were at least a competent, albeit lower level, group of 6 team. Still, 10-9, that's ugly. But then as things went along last year, the Demon Decons started to play kind of a slugfest chaos ball of sorts and started to win some pretty quality games. Do not forget that they had Georgia Tech. Remember Georgia Tech was it 7-0? I think they got up to 9-0 last year, 8-0, somewhere in that regard. They were looking like they might run the table and find their way into the college football playoff because they controlled their own fate to do so. Wake Forest had them on the ropes. They went for 2 to beat the Yellow Jackets, and they lost by 1 single point. And I didn't hate the call. I did not hate that decision whatsoever. Wake Forest last year also beat SMU and Virginia in ACC play. The reigning ACC runner-up, who beat Miami, the national runner-up, and then Virginia, who was in the ACC championship game. So it's not as if Wake Forest just went through their schedule last year, beat up on a bunch of crappy teams like North Carolina. They actually got trounced by Florida State. So they had their ups and downs. There's some room for growth. No doubt about it. But Wake Forest had a transitive win, a double transitive win. I guess it would just be a one-time. I don't know. I just made up that verbiage of sorts against the national runner-up in college football in the Miami Hurricanes, because SMU was one of Miami's 2 losses in the regular season. Speaking of Miami, they will travel to Wake Forest on Friday, September 18th. And look, we have seen as recently as last year when Miami, then second in the country, went to Louisville and lost. Did they go to Louisville or did they host Louisville? They played Louisville on a Friday and lost. Mario Cristobal's teams have lost games that they are not supposed to. Now that chatter dies down when you are one drive away from winning the national championship last season. That is still a game in the ACC I'm going to keep an eye on going into this 2026 campaign. Wake Forest's win total, by the way, is 5.5, according to our friends at FanDuel. I might lean towards the over. However, the quarterback situation isn't one that I am wild about. Now, there's a great story about this over at ESPN about Gio Lopez, the North Carolina transfer who was at South Alabama before that, rediscovering his joy for football with Wake Forest. And pretty notable, and a little bit of an indictment of Bill Belichick here, he said of leaving North Carolina for Wake Forest, quote, "It's fun again." That's not great. He is reuniting Gio Lopez, who is expected to be Wake Forest's starting quarterback this year, with his offensive coordinator from South Alabama, Rob Ezell. And Ezell is not just a good offensive mind and one of the more under-the-radar hires that has been made over the last couple seasons in college football from a coordinator standpoint. He is perhaps most famous for his spot-on and phenomenal impression of Nick Saban back in the day. He was an Alabama wide receiver. I don't think he had a huge career there statistically, but I'm sure many of you have seen it before. He's the one that is in the locker room impersonating Saban, saying, "The day I can't go out and coaches, I'll go." I can't repeat everything that is said there. Go watch it. The impression is spot on. So when Ezell was Lopez's offensive coordinator back in 2024, Lopez had his most productive season throwing the football, 18 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. It doesn't excite me. He's got a little Johnny Manziel to his game to just kind of make it happen, the scramble around. Jake Dickert's very praiseworthy of his ability to move in the pocket. I think Gio Lopez is okay if he can stay healthy. Had injuries last year at North Carolina because I don't think their O-line was very good. He was running around, got banged up. Hopefully he stays on the field. But just keep this in mind with regards to Wake Forest. Last year, they went 9-4. They were 4-4 in ACC play. Those wins over SMU and Virginia, who were towards the top of the league, they did so with Robbie Ashford as their primary quarterback. He completed 59% of his throws, just over 2,400 yards, 12 touchdowns to 8 picks. That is not high-level quarterback play. That is below average in the ACC, and yet the Demon Decons were a 9-game winner last year. So, of all the teams in the ACC, besides Cal, that could just sneak up on everyone, I don't think that anyone really paid attention to what Wake Forest did last season. And that fits with what Jake Dickert preaches as the mantra for his program. He says, we're built in the dark. As in, what happens on the field on Saturday happens when the lights are off and nobody is looking. Well, it also applies pretty well to what their program did last year, because they won 9 games in his first year coming over from Washington State. No buzz. Nothing. So if you're looking for a non-Cal sleeper pick in the ACC, don't overlook Wake Forest. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time, and until then, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.